Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our weekly ICEJ webinar. I'm David Parsons, your host and moderator today for a program that's looking at the upcoming Israeli elections. Next Tuesday, March 23rd, Israel goes to the polls for actually the fourth time in just over 2 years. It's almost like become like Italy, changing governments all the time. I think Israelis are going to elections more often than the dentist these days. And how did we get here? We've been sort of stuck in this political paralysis for the third elections last March left us with, it was a center-left alignment of parties that came together around Yair Lapid and three former IDF chiefs of staff, led by Benny Gantz, to try and defeat Mr. Security, Benjamin Netanyahu, a real effort and added sort of atmosphere in the nation that after so many years, more than a decade in office as prime minister now, it's time for Netanyahu to go. Gantz had promised not to get into a government with Netanyahu, but I think he probably did the right thing, the responsible thing because of the corona crisis at the time. He entered a rotation deal with Netanyahu, but that government collapsed just in December, a couple months ago, after failing to reach a state budget. And Israel really hasn't had a state budget passed because of all these elections and very fragile governments in several years now. And we're seeing once again that Israel's traditional political fault line has become largely irrelevant in these elections. The traditional security hawks versus doves, the pro-peace with the Palestinians, the left-right, conservative liberal, peaceniks versus nationalists. It's really all about Bibi or not Bibi. And even on the right, you have quite a few voters in New Hope and maybe some in Yamina that are right-wing, conservative, hawkish, but they want a new prime minister. And to start out, I'm going to share my screen and give the latest polling information. And we'll try and go full screen on that. The Israeli elections here in 2021. See if I have to move this again. This is the latest polls using the source is themadad.com, which they are trying to be, I guess, like the Real Clear Politics in the US, which takes the average of the polls, all the different polls, they weight them as which have been more accurate, who has the better science involved in it. And there's an effort now because there's a lot of polls. The last polls can only come out tomorrow. I'm sure our guest Gil Hoffman of the Jerusalem Post, they'll have one out tomorrow. But right now, here's what the average of the polls is saying. Likud 31, Yesh Atid, this is Yair Lapid again, center left, 21 seats. Likud, of course, is Prime Minister Netanyahu. Yamina on the right, a little to the right of Likud at 12 seats. They've are outpolling a little bit New Hope, Gideon Sa'ar, who's an offshoot from a breakaway from Netanyahu and the Likud. Arab Joint List at 9. The Shas and UTJ are at 7 and 8. These are the ultra-Orthodox parties. Israel Beiteinu, the Russian Immigrant Party at 7. Labor, the founding party of Israel, is at 6. The religious Zionists, some of these are like Kahanas and others on the far right, they're at 5 seats. Blue and White, Benny Gantz's party at 4. And according to this, these weighted average of polls, Meretz on the far left and Ra'am, which is a sort of breakaway Arab Islamist party, are not quite making the threshold. I believe it's 3.2 5% of the vote. You have to get enough for 4 seats minimum in order to enter the Knesset. They're not quite making it. We'll talk about it, but if they make it, these numbers change and it could make a big difference. And of course, the 4 main rivals right now, Benjamin Netanyahu, who served 3 years in the 90s and now 10 years as prime minister, Israel's longest serving prime minister. He's won 5 elections and managed, I think, he's has a real legacy in Israeli politics up there with Ben Gurion. Yair Lapid of the center left, Naftali Bennett of the right-wing Yamina party, and Gideon Sa'ar. These are the 4 that are polling the best right now, but the only real challenger to Bibi right now seems to be Yair Lapid. And we first want to bring on Gil Hoffman, who's the chief political correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. He's been a good friend of the Christian Embassy for many years, coming and not only giving us incredible insights into Israeli politics and Israeli society, but doing it with a real sense of humor. We always appreciate having you, Gil. And what can you tell us about the election on Tuesday? What's different about it this time? What's really piqued your interest, and how do you think it's going to turn out? You have to unmute there.
David, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to all the people who are here to this very special event. I'm coming to you live from the office of Benny Gantz, our alternate prime minister and defense minister. I came here to interview him, and he has given me a room here, so none of the alcohol in back of me is mine. And if the polls are anything, he needs the alcohol. I'm glad he has it, because he has no idea whether he's going to cross that menacing electoral threshold or not. And that's just one of many undecided factors here, which is what makes this election so exciting. You know, on the one hand, people can say, oh, they're just going to the polls again. It's the 4th time in 2 years. How boring. The foreign press isn't coming. Big stars come here. I've gotten interviewed every election by a lady named Becky Anderson. So a big lady on CNN. And there's a woman on the BBC named Lise Doucette who always comes. They're not coming. The foreign press is coming less than ever. And you know what? I understand, because we are going to not only our 4th election, really our 6th election in 2 years, if you count our elections for mayor and the runoff race we had. I have a 4-year-old daughter who I'm very close with. She likes going with me to places, and she's come with me to vote every time. And the last time that I took her to vote, she got sad. When we arrived, she said, "Daddy, where's the boat?" And I said, "No, we're coming here to vote." And he said, "Vote again? We always go to vote. When did you take me on a vote?" Poor 4-year-old girl has now voted 5 times already. So I don't think I'm going to make her come this time. But I think that story underscores that what Israel is trying to do is proving Einstein's theory of insanity, of doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, and expecting a different result. So, but this election actually is different than the other 3, as you wanted to hear, David, and I'll tell you why. So one last thing about why they're all the same first, which is that every election we've had has been about the future of Benjamin Netanyahu. You know, our elections in Israel are Shakespearean. They're to Bibi or not to Bibi. So, but the 2 Bibis and the not to Bibis are what has changed. So we'll do the not to Bibis first. So the first not to Bibi that's changed is that Netanyahu doesn't have his political bloc that he used to have. He used to be, he'd have his Likud, the Russian immigrant Yisrael Beitenu, the religious Zionists under Naftali Bennett, and the ultra-Orthodox all together. Well, now all he has is Likud and the ultra-Orthodox, and that religious Zionist party that might not cross the threshold. He's lost Bennett. He's lost Lieberman. Half of his, not half, but a large portion of his Likud left, joining Gideon Sa'ar, who left the Likud. And so that's different. He's going into an election with no cushion. to rely on, and that makes it much harder for him to get to that magic number of 61 that he needs to be able to form a government. A second big change that's happened is that he can no longer campaign against Israeli Arabs as he has successfully. In past elections, he's painted them as some kind of fifth column. He's warned that they're going out to vote in droves, and therefore you have to bring out voter turnout on the Likud side. Since then, over recently, he's been cooperating with Israeli Arabs, thinking that this is what's going to bring him another couple seats in the Knesset. I'm not so sure. If anything, he maybe was getting more from running against them than running with them. And so not having them is something that puts him at a disadvantage that he didn't have before. A third thing that's changed is that his trial has started. There are people who think that I personally don't, because any Israeli already has had an opinion on whether Netanyahu is innocent or guilty before the trial has begun. The people who think that the trial is frivolous and a witch hunt and out to get us, as sounding similar to what we've heard, they are sure that they're going to vote for him anyway. And the people who think that Netanyahu is corrupt, even though he's innocent until proven guilty, are not going to vote for him no matter what. But still, unlike past elections when Netanyahu is being questioned or they're going to be indicted, now he's actually on trial. Okay, so that is another not to be beat, at least in theory. Now that leaves us with the biggest not to be beat, which is that Donald Trump's not there. The last three elections, the Prime Minister of Israel called the President of the United States and requested a pre-election gift that would help him win, like recognizing the Golan Heights as part of Israel, and he'd get it. Well, he can't call Joe Biden and request such a thing. Joe Biden is purposely staying out of this election, and there's those who say that by staying out of the election, interfering in Israeli politics. Because if he had admitted what his plans are for the Palestinians, and there was some report in Reuters overnight that starts giving it away, how much he wants to help them, how much pressure he'll put on Israel to help them, it would help Netanyahu a lot in this election. And so Netanyahu's trying to have some other last-minute game changer. So he's tried to go to Dubai. That didn't work out. They didn't want to interfere in Israeli elections. He tried to bring in Albert Bourla, the head of Pfizer, on a visit to Israel to talk about how great Israel is and how great Netanyahu is. He refused to play that game. He gave Israel lots of vaccines, but he won't give Netanyahu an electoral gift. Netanyahu tried to bring back the bones of Eli Cohen, who spied for Israel in Syria in the 60s. It would have been a really nice positive headline. Still 4 days. Putin's helping, but it doesn't look like it's happening. So these are not to BBs. These are things that have changed, that Netanyahu had advantages before that he does not have now. Now, there are also two BBs that there weren't before. We have a peace with 4 countries, with Morocco, with Sudan, with Bahrain, and with the United Arab Emirates. I went to Dubai. It's awesome. I liked it a lot. You know, I'm from Chicago. I like tall buildings. It's very special that we could go there. We were welcomed very nicely over there, unlike London and Paris and other scary places out there to be Jews. So that was a great thing that he delivered, and it's all him. He deserves the credit. And of course, the vaccines. We would not be the vaccination nation without the Prime Minister calling Albert Bourla 30 times, including at 3 o'clock in the morning, as Bourla said. So that's something that I'm sure a lot of Israelis would give him credit for. We like having a world leader who's above and beyond. And the other thing that he has, which I mean isn't a change, is that he's by far the most experienced leader, and Israelis really value experience. He is. There's no one who can compete with him in experience except if Moses or Jesus comes here and interferes in our election. Moses, like Netanyahu, is from the tribe of Levi. He's a Levite. So those are things that Netanyahu has going in his favor that he did not have before. Will that be enough to carry him to victory? Nobody knows. And you know what? We're not going to know for a very long time. With all due respect to that 10 p.m. exit poll that we're going to have on Tuesday night, and then the actual vote counting of the regular ballots that we're going to have by Wednesday, and then the counting of what are called double ballots of diplomats and COVID patients who have special voting booths, and a polling station that they're opening up at the airport, and IDF soldiers. We're only going to have results on Friday. You know what? Even then, we won't have results. After that, there's going to be a process of trying to build a government overseen by the president of Israel. That can take another several months. He'll give one candidate a chance to form a government, might not succeed. Another candidate a chance to form a government, might not succeed. And then there would be a chance for another candidate to form a government with the support of a majority of the Knesset. That's how Netanyahu got the chance to form a government a year ago. And we don't know yet. We could have all three not succeed. And then that would force us to go to yet another election that would take place in September or October, and would just keep the political correspondent of the Jerusalem Post working nonstop. And luckily, I see my 4-year-old when I take her to vote. But one day, this is going to have to end, the insanity, and then we're going to really enjoy that boat ride.
We thank you, Gil. I've got lots of questions to get more information out of you, but that's very good. And just on that shelf up behind you there, is there any pink champagne?
I think that I'd have to do that from Netanyahu's office to get that.
Yeah. Might be some gifts from Packer up there. Yeah. Okay, we really appreciate that. We're going to come back to you with some questions in just a few moments, but we're going to also let Chris Mitchell, who is the bureau chief in Jerusalem for CBN News. He's been here 20 years, over 20 years now, covering Israel and the Middle East. And Chris, that's a lot of Israeli elections to also cover. And what's new about this one for you? What's interesting? Please jump in here.
Yeah, well, first of all, that's a great analysis, Gil, with of what's going to happen, and to Bibi or not to be Bibi. I like that Shakespearean line. I would add just a few things to that analysis. As Bibi campaigns, I guess he's running on three things: vaccinator in chief, for one. He was the one that brought peace to the Arab nations with the Abraham Accords. And also the experience. And I think the experience cuts both ways in terms of the U.S. And certainly he's not getting the kind of gifts that he did with President Donald Trump. On the other hand, he does have experience with President Biden. They've known each other for many, many years. And perhaps Israelis are going to be the ones that look at Prime Minister Netanyahu as at least somebody who is a known entity and has dealt with the U.S. For many, many years. So that could act in his favor. And as the Biden administration, continues to pursue negotiations with Iran over their nuclear deal, as it continues to sort of push away some of the Gulf Arab nations like Saudi Arabia, and as it, seems to reverse all the policies that the Trump administration had in regards to the Palestinian Authority, that actually might seem to benefit Netanyahu in the last few days. The other thing that really strikes me, and I had a conversation earlier today with an Israeli friend of mine, and I was asking him if he's decided on who to vote for, and he said no. And I says, well, when do you think you'll decide to vote? And he says, well, maybe in the voting booth he'll decide. And I know there's a poll recently that came out that 43% of Israelis will decide the day of or the day before. And that's such a huge number, going into a national election. And it really makes any predictions extremely hard. In fact, and then when you reference that, Gil, we won't know the results for that day or several days or maybe a few weeks. putting together a coalition, it's like a chess game and sort of like a puzzle, but even more so like a Rubik's Cube, trying to put a coalition together. If the polls, as you cited earlier, David, I did some quick math to add up, Likud, Yamina, Shas, and some of those other parties that will likely join a right-wing coalition. Right now it's at 63. That's pretty optimistic, but that really does depend on Yamina trying to join. But I can't see any scenario where Bennett will try to form or go back with Gideon Sari, Yair Lapid. I'm not sure that that's going to happen. But at least according to that poll, it looked pretty good for Netanyahu. But we'll see. But so many unvariables. As you mentioned, Gil, now Netanyahu is courting the Arabs as opposed to sort of demonizing them just a few days before the election. That's one thing. And then who gets into the passes the threshold? In that poll you had 2 didn't make it, David, but there's as many, blue and white. Will they make it? It remains to be seen. And that's going to change the whole, mathematic equation about who's can put together a coalition. So many uncertainties and variables going into the next few days. It will give you a lot to write on, Gil, and we'll have a lot to report on as well. But certainly, I think, a lot of people, both Jews and Christians, are going to be praying for some sort of a stable government, despite the political machinations and gridlock here. The Middle East continues to go on. Iran continues to get bolder and more pressing the envelope, as it were. So Israel really does need some stability to face its enemies in a volatile Middle East. Not to say an administration that's not nearly as friendly as the former administration. So a lot to be concerned about and a lot to be praying for too.
Thank you, Chris. You bring up a good point in doing the math here, and Gil, you got to help us understand this. That if you took, say, traditional right of center voters from Likud, from Yamina, even from Gideon Sa'ar, most of those are former Likud or centrist right voters in his New Hope party, the ultra-Orthodox parties, Shas and UTJ, the religious parties, and even Israel Beitenu, which tend to be hawkish, conservative Russian immigrants. You actually have almost 75 to 80 seats, but some of them are insisting we will not sit with Bibi, like Gideon Sa'ar and Lieberman, who used to be close to him, and now they got disaffected with him. And I mean, what is it? What is their main complaint against Netanyahu? Is it the corruption, just too long in office, his personality, this sense of privilege among his family? What is it that they're rejecting?
There we go. I'm sitting here in Benny Gantz's office, and I think that's there's no more symbolic place to understand the frustration with Netanyahu. Netanyahu signed a coalition agreement with Benny Gantz that said that he would relinquish the title of Prime Minister to Gantz on the 17th of November, 2021. And the only loophole out of it was not passing a state budget. So he didn't pass a state budget and brought Israel to waste another 150 billion shekels having this ridiculous election that no one wanted, just in order to stay in power. And so the feeling is among all those opponents of Netanyahu that he keeps on making decisions like these that might help him personally, might help his criminal trial, but are obviously harmful to the state of Israel. We obviously need a state budget and should not be wasting this money when we're spending so much unexpected money on vaccines. So they think that has been happening more and more and more, that Israel has become very much a fiefdom of one person or one family, and that can't be allowed to go on anymore. That we need to go back to having more kind of professional leadership, less political leadership, less personal leadership. And so that's what a majority of the of the candidates in that poll want. The majority of the candidates in that poll want Netanyahu defeated, but a majority of the candidates in that poll are right wing. So that's our recipe for a continued political stalemate. And as long as you have a majority of both that don't intertwine enough, that's why we could keep on doing this forever.
Mhm.
And as long as Netanyahu is there, look, whether people like Donald Trump or not, the one word that everybody in America could agree on with Donald Trump is the word divisive. And not having a divisive president of the United States, if that's possible in America, would make things more stable. Here, not having a divisive prime minister of Israel would make things more stable. Whoever would replace him in Likud would form a coalition very, very easily.
Yeah, but that's going to be hard for some other figure to truly unite the country. But it does seem like the pendulum here is still swinging to the right, with most of the voters right of center. But this has left Bennett as you're always looking for the kingmaker, who's the guy who can really decide who's going to be prime minister. He has not committed one way or another, as far as I understand. Naftali Bennett of Yamina has not ruled out sitting in a government with Bibi, and he could, his problem, I think, might be that it would also include some of the Kahanas, some people who are seen as racist or whatever.
Look, someone's got to be lying, David. Someone's got to break a promise. And again, here I'm in Gantz's office. He 3 times said he would not sit with Netanyahu. In the end, for the good of the country, he did. And so it could be Bennett who's lying about not sitting with the extreme right or not sitting with the extreme left, meaning with Meretz and with Mansour Abbas's party, that a Muslim Arab party. He says he won't sit with either of them. Well, he might need either of them in order to enable a coalition to be formed without Netanyahu. And then on the other side, it could be that Mansour Abbas, who wants to cooperate with the right, would be needed for Netanyahu to form a coalition. But the religious Zionist party over there says, under no circumstances would they be willing to sit with him. So then that's when they start talking about defectors, that each side will try to get defectors within each party. Well, that's not going to happen the first time someone tries to form a government. When there's a second chance and a third chance, that's the kind of thing that happens at the last minute to try to avoid an election from happening. So there's so many factors that could change over the next few months, and that's why people should be tuning into jpost.com every day to follow all the excitement.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Arab sector vote a little more in a minute, but I want to go to Chris with a question. And first, when you talk about defectors, Gil, you're talking about the election is held. You know who is getting into the Knesset, the members of the Knesset, but then a few guys who got elected, say in Yamina or New Hope, go back to Likud, switch parties, which they can do, and put Bibi over the threshold. That's what you're talking about. Yeah, which there's a possibility of it. Chris, the whole Abraham Accord seemed like one of the real, one of the lasting legacies of Netanyahu here in recent years that would have a lasting impact for him. But something about the relationship with the United Arab Emirates, there's been a bit of a debacle here. Can you let our viewers know a little of what's happened there, the Jordanian involvement, and does it show that the Abraham Accords are really fragile?
Well, yeah, there was a bit of a kerfuffle just a few days ago. Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to go to the UAE and meet with the Crown Prince there. Jordan decided not to allow them to fly over Jordanian airspace, which upset, I'm sure, that maybe Netanyahu. Would have been a prize for him to be able to meet with the Crown Prince. And maybe they were a bit upset that the fact that I wanted to use that sort of state visit in his campaign just a few days before the election. So yeah, it is somewhat fragile. Maybe this is the first sort of setback since the last several months, back in September when they signed them on the White House lawn. But I think that can be expected in these kind of relations. I think what's holding them together is probably stronger than these what's happened in the last few days with the UAE and Jordan. I think the fact that they also face a common enemy with Iran, I think, is probably the strongest thing that brings them together, as well as the trade and tourism that they all look forward to. And as Gil said, he went down to visit there, and it was a wonderful experience. I think a lot of Israelis just, as soon as the doors were open, flooded down there to the Gulf states, and I think that will continue. But in the meantime, this was sort of a minor setback, but I don't think it's too serious to break what I think will be seems to be a long-term relationship in light of the current geopolitics in the region.
Yeah, and Gil was talking about, it is one of the two BB points that, he does have this diplomatic, victories of securing these deals. And he says there's some other countries in line. He said 4 countries. Any idea who that might be? Who other Arab or Muslim majority countries who may join the Abraham Accord?
Well, certainly that would be Saudi Arabia would be the number one. I think that everybody's looking at the possibility. Oman, Netanyahu has already visited them, and a couple more. But I think you'd have to really put your eyes on Saudi Arabia as the number one. And you see the Biden administration is really seeming to put a bit of a distance between Saudi Arabia and the United States right now. And I think that might cut both ways in terms of Saudi Arabia wanting to get closer to Israel. We were down there before the Abraham Accords had been signed, both in the UAE and then in Saudi Arabia. And I think there's a sort of an impetus that they need to shore up their alliances and this sort of behind-the-scenes defense pact. We were there actually when Saudi Arabia got attacked back in September of 2019, their largest oil refinery facility attacked by Iranian drones and missiles. And so I think they remember that. And as well, you see that Yemen seems to be emboldened and hitting Saudi Arabia more with missiles. And so I think all of those things, I think, bode lead probably to closer relationships. And who knows, maybe there'll be normalized relations with Saudi Arabia and Israel as part of these ongoing Abraham Accords.
Gil, any comments on that diplomatic scorecard for Netanyahu? Seems like a positive, but it's gotten shaken in the last few days. I think the Jordanians didn't allow Netanyahu's plane to go through Jordanian airspace on the way to the United Arab Emirates because the Crown Prince of Jordan wanted to come here, and Israel felt he had too many security guys with him or something.
Okay, so there's this myth that diplomatic issues are what Israelis vote on, and that Netanyahu going to Congress and delivering a speech about Iran, he did to help himself politically because it was right before an Israeli election. I'm going to give him credit and say that he did that to help the country and to try unsuccessfully to stop the Iran deal, and point out that he did not gain a single seat or lose a single seat from that speech, nor would he from a diplomatic success now or a diplomatic failure now, because Israelis know what you're getting. It's like ordering the same McDonald's hamburger. It's not going to change. It's been the same for a long time. We know that that's what he does well. And if that's really important to you, then you're going to vote for him. And if it's not really important to you, then you're not going to care. So that's not a game changer. And Netanyahu, that's great. He's in, as his previous election slogan said, a league of their own, compared to the current slogan, one leader, a lot of politicians around him. But what has changed? What has changed is the American election. If you don't have Donald Trump as president of the United States anymore, maybe you don't need a Netanyahu. Donald Trump viewed Netanyahu as a mentor. He learned a lot from him on Iran and other issues. Joe Biden's famous quote about Netanyahu is, "I love you, Bibi, but I don't agree with anything you say," with a swear word in there or two, maybe, I think. I won't say in an International Fellowship of Christians and Jews webcast. So, well, I'm sure another leader he could fall in love with, another leader of Israel, the President of the United States, could love and maybe agree with a little more.
Yeah. And on the Arab voting bloc, I think it's very interesting, Gil, that there are around 20% of the population. Maybe they don't vote as many, but it's around 15 to 20% of the Knesset could be filled by Arab votes. And the joint list, getting 9-10 seats right now, they've said we won't recommend Bibi as prime minister. We wouldn't sit with him, but if he gave us certain stuff, we'd be okay with it. But last election, it was the first time that they recommended a prime minister. They recommended Gantz, which was a new, sort of breaking a taboo there. Is the next step joining a coalition government at some level? I mean, UTJ on the right, Orthodox Party, they don't want to be responsible for government decisions, so they always supported the coalition from the outside and got nice Knesset committee chairmanships. What could you foresee as far as an Arab component in a coalition government?
So just first of all, on parliament seats, there'll probably be less. We had a record number of non-Jews in the previous parliament. Somebody in the chat asked a question about Christians. We had 2 Christians from the joint Arab list in the previous parliament, to the point that when they disbanded the Knesset to go to the first election, that happened on December 24th. And that day, the Knesset speaker, Yuli Edelstein, he announced anyway, before he knew that Netanyahu would do that we would finish the parliament early on December 24th in honor of Christmas, and not realizing that all the Christians in the Knesset were Orthodox and therefore celebrate Christmas on the 7th of January. So the only person who was going to be benefiting from this decision was going to be me, because I celebrate my American Jewish heritage by going to a movie and eating Chinese food on that night. So the number of Arabs is expected to go down you had 17 in the outgoing Knesset, probably have more like 14, 13 this time. And then in the government, what you're really asking about, Mansour Abbas is a fascinating person. If his United Arab List party crosses that electoral threshold, he's someone who believes in cooperating with any Israeli government, no matter where they are, whether it would be as a cabinet minister or supporting it from outside, in order to improve the infrastructure of the Arab sector in Israel. Arab towns look less good than Jewish towns. It's not because of racism. It's due to politics. It's due to them never joining a government in Israel because they said the Palestinians would be completed first. Well, now if Arab countries are making peace with Israel, then Israeli Arabs can make peace with Israel. And that's something that Mansour Abbas understands and his former colleagues on the joint list don't. So they could hold the key. They could be the kingmakers, and someone, no matter how right-wing they are, in the Israeli government might have to get used to it, because it's definitely preferable to cooperate with them than it would be to go to another election.
Yeah, I think the drawback for most Israeli Jews is the whole security issue. If they're in the government, they get access to state secrets and such, and that's one of the reservations they've had. But Gil, I saw it was interesting that in some of these polls of who would you like to be prime minister, just that one issue, there was a third of the Arab voters who said they preferred Bibi as prime minister. It was quite interesting.
Better the devil you know, huh?
Yeah. Chris, we've got Netanyahu gaining ground in some of the polls this week. As I said earlier, the last polls will come out tomorrow. Under Israeli law, there cannot be any more between Friday and next Tuesday. But in the last couple of days, Bibi's gained a couple seats, Likud has. And some are attributing it to the effectiveness of this vaccination campaign in this sense that Israel's getting back to normal ahead of all other countries. And how do you see how Israel's handled Corona, and is that going to be a last minute asset for Bibi to help maybe show he has the momentum, and maybe it'll convince Bennett to form a government with it?
That could be. I remember asking another political analyst a few months ago, I said, what's Bibi running on? And he said, well, the only thing he's running on at that time was the vaccination campaign. And it really does seem to be he's just gone all in on the vaccinations, and now well over 5 million that are vaccinated. And I guess the goal a couple of months ago was to be able to reopen Israel by Passover. And that looks to be like they're going to meet that goal. I think it's a mixed legacy, I think, that he has. He not only has the vaccination campaign, which most of Israelis are for. There is a minority that are against the vaccinations, and also against this whole idea of a green passport for those that have a conscientious objection to maybe the vaccination, but they have to. They're sort of a medical apartheid, as some people have called it. They can't go to certain places, may not be able to go to their jobs. So that's one issue. The other issue is the lockdowns. Israel being the nation in all the world that probably has been locked down more than any other since the beginning of the pandemic. Many businesses have closed, never to reopen. Right around the corner from our bureau, there's a restaurant that we used to love to frequent. That's not open, and I'm sure there's many other businesses. So I think it's a mixed legacy, and I think Netanyahu will certainly get some support for those that believe that he's done an amazing job about getting Israel vaccinated and on the verge of reopening internally as well as to the world. But also, I think there is a mixed, some people object to the way the lockdowns that seem to be so draconian to some, and leaves a legacy of many businesses that may not ever reopen. Yeah, I think that's probably helped him more than not. I think the vaccination campaign here in Israel.
Gil, any late, last minute breaking momentum that could really tip this one way or the other? Because right now it just looks so close that Bibi could make it or he couldn't.
Well, let's take you back to 2015. At this point in 2015, Netanyahu was losing. The polls were showing that Isaac Herzog had passed him up, his Zionist Union Party that he had formed with Tzipi Livni. And what happened between Friday and Tuesday? Well, already the following night, Saturday night, both Netanyahu and Herzog were interviewed by the Meet the Press television show that we have here. And Herzog said something stupid. He said that he would not keep Jerusalem united, but he would keep Netanyahu united. And he was interviewed looking very small in the studio, while Netanyahu was interviewed very large in the video above his head. And that made a big change that happened in the last 3 days, while polls were illegal to be printed, not taken. And so this Saturday night, Meet the Press and its rival show on the other channel are all having all the party leaders. All it has to happen is one of them to not stay on message. And we also have the polls that are running in tomorrow's paper. I just got a message from the pollster. No, we're not getting it early tonight. Are you kidding? Writes me. It would have been nice. So polls also have an impact on how people vote. They dictate reality, not only reflect reality.
Gil, on the corona vaccine issue, it seems that, you know, for a lot of Christians, especially those who are going to be watching today, they know there's a lot of concerns and reservations about these vaccines, especially these RNA messenger vaccines. We covered that in last week's webinar. Very interesting discussion with one of Israel's top doctors. But I think people should know, and can you confirm, it just seems like the whole political spectrum has been pro-vaccine, and it's almost like you're trying to be more pro-vaccine than the next guy, so that no one, if there was a problem, with these Moderna vaccines here, someone would have grabbed hold of it to try and undermine Netanyahu, but it hasn't happened.
Any one of the parties could have adopted an anti-vaccine agenda. Yisrael Beitenu, Lieberman came the closest to it, and all their polls told them not to touch that third wire, whatever, what is the phrase. And that's because everyone here has put their faith in those vaccines and pledged their allegiance to them. A smart argument that could have, weren't there corrupt deals made between Netanyahu and these pharmaceutical companies without really bringing it to proper voting and certainly proper transparency of what was in the agreement? Aren't they experimenting with us and making us guinea pigs for the entire world in order to have enough data for FDA approval? I've heard all these things, but they're not coming from politicians. They'd be stupid to make these arguments.
I think that's interesting to remember going forward, that the political, the whole gamut of the political spectrum here has embraced the vaccination program, even though there are some activists out there. I don't want to dismiss them as anti-vaxxers, but people who have legitimate concerns because there weren't long-term testing on these. But Chris Mitchell, we're going to start wrapping up here. What is your, what do you think are some of the lessons of 4 elections now? I think one of, for me, is that you really don't need an Israeli government, but how would you describe Israeli democracy right now? Some say it's being destroyed by Bibi. Do you really feel that, or is it as robust as ever?
Well, I don't know about robust. It seems to be limping along. And just to add on to that vaccination story, we did ask Naftali Bennett about that, and he pretty much said, just go ahead and get vaccinated, trust the science. So I think, as you say, across the political spectrum, the vaccination issue was really supported by the political spectrum. Democracy, I think that Israel is still a vibrant democracy despite the last couple of years. And I think it will survive this election and even a 5th one if it goes there. I was just asked a question on the 700 Club by Pat Robertson about the fact that what about Iran in the midst of this political sort of paralysis? Will Israel be able to stand up against Iran if it needs to? And my answer would be yes. Despite all the political gridlock, I think militarily and security-wise, Israel is able to take care of itself and will endure and will continue. But right now, with the unusual political landscape, and when you have a right-wing country, but you have right-wing parties that refuse to sit with each other, makes it very difficult. Some of that is personal, and some of that is political. And when you combine the coronavirus on top of the political landscape, that just complicates things even more. And so in spite of all this, though, I think Israel will continue and endure its democracy. Maybe there'll be some electoral reforms out of this. I'm not sure about that. I know that's been talked about for a long time, but I'm not sure that's going to happen right away. But we'll see, and we'll see for the next few days what's going to happen, and then the next few weeks. But certainly we'll have a lot to talk about, a lot to report on, and for all of our audience, I'm sure they're interested, a lot to pray about.
Okay, Gil, what are the lessons of these repeat elections? What can Israel do to get out of this cycle?
There are parties that have electoral reform agendas. Several parties are in favor of term limits for prime minister. And Netanyahu himself was in favor of term limits for prime minister. He spoke about it on video. It's there from before he became prime minister the first time, said 2 terms was enough. Well, is it? Gideon Sa'ar, his party has a very extensive electoral reform platform of electing half the Knesset by direct regional elections. Then there is the more controversial change that can be made, which is to bar someone under indictment from forming a government. Now, that violates the principle of innocence until proven guilty. Indicted means innocent. It means question. It does not mean you've been charged with, convicted of anything, right? So, but both Bennett and Saar have said that they would not support making that change for this election. But if we're going to go to a fifth election, they're going to bring him down. They're going to pass this bill and prevent him from running again.
Mhm.
And that's what would change everything.
Mhm. So Netanyahu has sought some sort of immunity protection, and right now that's out of the question based on the polls and the positions of the parties now.
Immunity is up.
Yeah.
Punishing him with before still within the question.
Okay, we're going to ask you to, based on all your many years of experience following Israeli politics, your prediction let me put it this way: do you think we'll get a stable government out of this election, or will there be a fifth? Will there be a rotation? Anything you can offer us there?
No.
Yeah.
The Cubs are going to win the World Series with God's help, David. That's my prediction. I'm not going to make any predictions here. I just wrote 1,500 words this morning about how this is the most unpredictable election in Israel's history. That we believe in Judaism that prophets and fools are the only people who can make predictions. Well, I'm neither.
Chris, are you going to take a guess here?
Well, I was going to say the phrase that came to mind was be a fool's errand trying to predict this. Like Gil said, there's, as he said, probably the most unpredictable election in Israel's history, certainly in my time here in Israel. If I would make a guess, I would say perhaps a narrow right-wing government if the polls fall the way you had at the beginning. But too many variables to bet on that. It's with the threshold, with the undecided voters. But I would say it's probably most likely that Netanyahu will have the chance to form that government. I can't see on the left that happening. And it would have to be Yamina and Naftali Bennett joining a right-wing narrow coalition. But if I had to say anything, I would lean that way. I wouldn't say it's going to happen, but that would be my leaning.
Yeah, I tend to go that way too, and I think it all hinges so that people are viewing that when you look at the results, the polls will close at 10 o'clock Israel time next Tuesday evening, and they'll immediately come out with the television stations with their straw poll results taken at the polling stations, but they always change overnight as the official results come. But it's going to depend on how some of the smaller parties who are near the threshold to make the Knesset, a political party has to win at least 3.25% of the raw vote, which is around enough for 4 seats. And you've got
150,000 votes.
150,000. So it's blue and white. Meretz on the far left, blue and white in the center, Ra'am, an Islamist Arab party, and the religious Zionists over on the right, some of the Kahanas, that if Meretz and Ra'am wouldn't make it, you'd have a lot more, some of these are very close, and that's going to have a big impact. What happens if they do not make it, those 3 or 4 seats have to be redistributed among the other parties. Some of these parties have vote sharing agreements that you redistribute it in the way the calculations are made, right?
Those votes get thrown away.
They get thrown away, but
Completely.
if you're doing polls now, you would have to adjust the final results.
There's also vote sharing agreements between parties, and there's a whole thing called Vater Elfer that automatically gives more seats to the top 2 parties, which means that both Likud and Yesh Atid are getting more than they say in the polls right now. It's really complicated. Yes,
yeah. But I think in several of the elections here in the last 10 years or so that Netanyahu has won, he has had that little boost at the end that got him to where even with, you mentioned Zippy Livni, and he outmaneuvered her so that blocked her from forming a government. She got the first crack, and then he was able to form it. But he's not got that sort of political card up his sleeve right now with Lieberman. and Gideon Sa'ar and perhaps Bennett refusing to sit with him. But we'll have to see. I think Bennett is going to be in the driver's seat about where this government goes, and it may depend on how things, the momentum shift, even slight, over the next couple of days. We do ask everyone to be praying for Israel, pray for the electorate, for the Israeli electorate, that they'll make wise decisions, that there will be a stable government, and Baruch Hashem, that God's will would be done here. God's watching over this nation. We want to thank Gil Hoffman, the chief political correspondent at the Jerusalem Post. Thank you, Gil.
You're welcome.
Hi to Mr. Gantz for us. Thank you, Chris Mitchell, the Jerusalem bureau chief for CBN News. Thank you, Chris.
Great to be with you, David and Gil.
Okay, and just want to remind everyone, next week we will have our global prayer gathering on Wednesday at 4 o'clock as usual. Then next Thursday at the same time, 4 o'clock, our ICEJ weekly webinar will feature a Passover teaching, Passover and the Cross. With Passover, Easter, Resurrection Sunday season coming up, we'll have Malcolm Heading, the former executive director of the Christian Embassy, he's still on our board of trustees, and he'll be bringing us a good Bible teaching on the connection between Passover and the ministry of Jesus. And then we also have a special video series coming up that over Passover Easter season. It's called the Passion Week. 5 programs that will be up on YouTube that we'll place there between Palm Sunday and Resurrection Sunday, filmed from here on location, Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, Herod's Palace, and the Garden Tomb, with teachings by Jürgen Buehler, our president, Barry Dennison, one of our vice presidents, and we have also some special guests on there. So please be looking for that on our Facebook page. There'll be more information on it. And we want to thank you. Please share this video. It'll be up on YouTube and Facebook. This webinar, share it with others, help them understand the Israeli election. And thank you again to our guests. God bless you, everyone.